I'm gonna warn you, I talk about death in this video. A whole lot of death. Pretty much every kind you can imagine. Nothing is explicit or overly gory, so much you can do with the words, really. But yeah, major spoilers for Magnus Archives. Hi, in this video I'm going to share with you a story idea I had in the shower. I've always loved the trope of greater powers giving humans supernatural abilities. To be more specific, I've always loved the trope of there being multiple, godlike entities that provide blessings to individuals who meet certain requirements. And I love it even more if the blessing in question relates to the god who provided it. An example of this would be Genshin Impact. I know, weird, but stick with me. In Genshin Impact, when a human does something amazing, like defeat a sea dragon or something, looking at you, Beto, they're rewarded with powers that align with one of 7 elements. In the case of a dude named Bennett, he managed to survive being fatally wounded, and was given nifty fire powers by a presumed fire god. That's really, really cool. And it got me thinking, I want to write a story like that. I want to have a pantheon of gods who give super awesome superpowers to their chosen heroes. So that's the basis of my idea. Gods who give magic powers. Pretty simple. So let's expand a little. What are the gods like? Well, I like stories where the gods follow a theme of some sort, and aren't just gods of random things. Like how in Greek mythology there's just randomly a god of honey. Let's take a look at a masterpiece, the Magnus Archives. Huge spoilers. Please click away, listen to the podcast, then come back. I can't stress how brilliant the Magnus Archives is and how it needs to be watched blind. Or listened, it's a podcast. One of the bigger twists in the Magnus Archives is that the spooky, supernatural nonsense that's been happening throughout the series have been caused by these fear gods called the Dread Powers. These dread powers embody our fear. So one of them, the Vast, embodies our fear of heights and deep waters and everything big, stuff like that. Or another one, the Corruption. It's our visceral fear of disgust, disease, and so on. There are 14 of these dread powers in total, an entire pantheon, and they all follow the theme of representing fear, which ensures they stay consistent. I want my gods to be like that. It's so tidy. It allows everything to be a whole lot more digestible. You look at it and you think, fear. Easy stuff. Another inspiration will be H.P. Lovecraft and classic Victorian horror. I think one of my biggest issues with modern literature is that I find a whole lot of them are written with the author imagining that their story is like a movie, which means, more often than not, their narrative doesn't take advantage of the fact that it's in the written form. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm sure most people would like it if their creative works go on the big screen, but I want my story to really flaunt that it's being told through the written word. And that's what I think H.P. Lovecraft and old Gothic texts do well. In Bram Stoker's Dracula, bits and pieces of the greater plot are revealed through an ever-shifting narrative, which really helps build the suspense and horror. Something I've noticed is that modern video games and movies don't really capture the idea of Dracula and Cthulhu as well as the originals, particularly Cthulhu, I find. These older novels weren't written with film in mind, because obviously film wasn't a thing back then. So they're pretty proud of the fact that their novel is, well, a novel. I want the story I'm cooking up to follow their lead. I want it to be told in a way only a novel could be told. Mind you, all of this is being thought up in the shower, and I only have 10 minutes in there, so I had to operate quickly. My last bit of inspiration came from the SCP universe, particularly the tone it conveys. Some aspects of the SCP-verse can be incredibly depressing and hopeless in a way I find pretty unique. You see, I don't like grimdark. I find that a lot of grimdark is, well, dark. So much so that it borders on edgy. Like, yeah dude, children in this universe get eaten if they aren't strong enough, big woof. But the SCP universe is different in its darkness. I find that the hopelessness is very clinical. It's this cold, gray, saturated kind of depressing, not aggressive in its sadness, more bleak in its terror. People still get on with their lives, and bad stuff isn't happening 24/7, And yet, there's still this prevailing sense of clinical gray. Of course, not every entry is like that, but I do want my story to have that backdrop of misery and hopelessness. I know, that's very 14-year-old, but I do enjoy the melancholy. It's kind of nice in a peaceful kind of way. Alright, I have a whole lot of inspirations listed. What have I been cooking up? I'll just tell you. The story is called Defied. Imagine all the different ways we can die. Suffocation, starvation, burning, getting crushed, and so on. What if all of these different forms of deaths were gods in their own right? What if these gods, which I've called death gods for simplicity, and because I suck at names, embodied every kind of way we can die? So, for example, burning to death. I've called the god that oversees burning to death Melt. And Melt isn't just burning to death, it also embodies any kind of death caused by heat. There are 9 of these death gods in total, and it goes as follows. Impact, which is falling, getting crushed, anything to do with weight. Withering, which is starvation and thirst. Melt, which I've already talked about. Frost, which is freezing to death, illness. Illness, which is disease, age, sickness, and poison. Killing, anything to do with violence and human-related deaths. Butchered, anything to do with animals. And lastly, destruction, which is natural disasters. Again, if you don't like the names, me neither. I suck at names. Really, really suck. I've kind of followed the Magnus Archives approach and come up with several names for them that the characters might call them, but we'll see what happens. I've went around and asked people if I've missed anything, if there are other ways of dying I haven't come up with, and the only form of death we could really think of was electrocution. But there's only so much I can do with electricity, so I've kind of chosen to just sweep that under the rug. But hey, I can justify it by sorting it under a different kind of death. Someone mentioned being impaled because of an accident. I know, this really dark stuff, but whatever. We concluded that it could fall under illness because, you kind of bleed to death or your organs get punctured and fail. So it's an illness. Okay, so the story really started shaping up when I came up with the idea of different kinds of hell. What if each death god ruled over hells unique to them? Imagine a hell based off falling to death, or a hell based on eternal starvation. It's unique, it's pretty edgy, and I don't know, I like it. Then I decided to throw in some SCP depressing spice in there. What if there wasn't a heaven? What if there's only these hells? No matter how good you were, or how awful, you will end up in one of these hells. And worst of all, your hell will be based off how you died. So, if you choke to death, you'll end up in a hell where you'll forever be choking, feeding the choke god. Now, that's depressing. Alright, we're on a roll. Let's keep going. The entire reason why these gods do this, supervise hellscapes and everything, is because they want to gorge on souls. To be more specific, they want to gorge on humanity's pain and suffering. The issue, though, is that people don't really die because of one reason. Let's take freezing to death. Sure, your soul will most definitely end up with frost, but if you died from frostbite, shouldn't you also end up with illness? What if when you die, your soul isn't completely whole? What if it gets split up between all the hells relevant to your death? That'd mean the death gods would pretty much balance each other out. No one god would be more prevalent than the others, as they all get a pretty hefty cut when someone dies. And this balance would probably be reflected in reality, where the presence of one power disrupts another. So Melt being around would probably stop Frost, and vice versa. And I'm sure that'd be incredibly frustrating to these unknowable eldritch entities. So, what do? Well, they basically create hands to help maintain their sphere of influence, to help feed them. These hands would come in the form of artifacts and monsters with the sole purpose of encouraging their patrons' kind of death. So I don't know, imagine a killer Jack the Frost being an embodiment of freezing to death, running around. I don't know, that's silly stuff, but whatever. To add on to this, they would also employ dead humans, and that's what I'm really excited to talk about. When someone dies, they suffer forever in hell. There's no getting numb to it, you're forever constantly hurting. I had my friend who was like, oh, like I'm sure you'd eventually just get used to it, but like, dude, it's hell. Like the whole point is you're suffering, you're not getting used to that. I don't know. But there is one way to escape from it. If you meet certain criteria, then you can be reanimated as what I call a coroner. These coroners are extremely powerful and possess supernatural abilities related to whatever death god they serve. Unlike artifacts and monsters, their job isn't solely to cause death. They have a mission. But before I get to that, let's talk about how you can become a coroner. There are 3 factors in determining if you're eligible. 1, you need to have a reason to come back, like a loved one, or it's something you really want to do before you died. 2, you needed to be absolutely afraid of death. And when I mean afraid, I mean afraid. Top 1 fear, an actual phobia. And lastly, you needed to have been familiar with a particular kind of death god or the ideas they bring. This can be a whole lot more metaphorical than you think. A coroner for the Withering probably wouldn't have had the most healthy relationship with food, or a coroner for the Destruction maybe would have been fascinated with the disasters, like the movie Twisters. Or maybe a coroner for a choke could be someone who is buried in debt, choking under the pressure, as it were. The thing about this whole coroner idea that I like so much is that no matter how awful they are as a coroner, you can kind of sympathize with them. I mean, they're only doing what they're doing because they don't want to suffer for all of eternity. They're selfish, sure, but in the Defied universe, there's only 2 choices. Kill a few people, or eternal damnation. Alright, so what is the coroner's mission? Their mission is to initiate rites. As I mentioned before, the powers are pretty balanced, but let's take a look at a moment in history where that probably wouldn't be the case. The Black Death, for example. That was a pretty significant moment in European history, and it would have seen the illness claiming an absurd amount of souls. Now, even though the event was big, I wouldn't say it would have been quite universal enough to really tip the scales towards the illness. After all, the sick were being sent to burnt death, so Melt wouldn't have had it that bad. These rites, though, would be different. If a rite is successful, then it'll cause an event that'd favor a particular death god. So, if the killing achieves a rite, then the world would be plunged into World War III. But rites don't just strengthen a power, it also weakens that power's adversaries. Ooh, I can't say that word, adversaries. Sorry. So back to the killing example. A successful rite might strengthen people's immune system so that the illness would struggle to claim souls. In a nutshell, the point of rites is to put a certain power on top by changing the world to best suit it. It isn't ending the world, but it'd be terrible for humanity if a rite actually succeeded. Now, the question is, how are these rites done in the first place? Okay, so I kinda lied before, I do have one final inspiration. Infinity War. To be more specific, the idea of MacGuffins, which are dangerous in their own right, that are powerful tools just by themselves. So I guess they aren't really MacGuffins, but whatever. It's not like I'm a writer, whatever. I was thinking, for a rite to be accomplished, the coroners would need something akin to the Power Stones. I was thinking of 3 ancient tombs that I've taken to calling the Necronomicons. The Necrocomicons? The Necronomicons, yeah, I can do pronunciation. I've ripped the name from H.P. Lovecraft because I'm terrible, but whatever. Yeah, so the Necronomicons are artifacts that are unique in that, in their default state, they belong to each power equally. This means that by themselves, they're completely invincible as they cancel all forms of death by containing all forms of death. But they aren't always so balanced. When a coroner holds a Necronomicon, it temporarily shifts to favor that coroner's death god. So if a coroner for Frost holds one, for instance, then that Necronomicon would become an artifact for the Frost. Mind you, though, it'll only last for as long as that person is holding it, and the second it's let go, it'll go back to its normal, neutral state. Each Necronomicon is unique. By the way, again, these names are a work in progress. I really do suck at coming up with cool names. I'm sorry. The bookkeep lists everyone and everything who's ever died, and what they were like while they were alive, and what powers claimed them. The phone book captures a shard of every departed soul, and when activated can summon that shard as a kind of ghost. Mind you, the ghost is a mere echo of the original, and the souls summoned in this way can't be summoned again. The coroner's list is basically a reverse of the bookkeep. It lists everyone who's alive, where they are, what they're like, and what power they'll most likely end up in. The keyword being most likely. It doesn't predict the future, only calculates it. I wanted the names to be really banal stuff, like a bookkeep is just a record of a business's finances, so I thought it'd be pretty funny to call a book that records all departed souls a bookkeep. These Necronomicons, aside from being nifty tools and incredibly difficult to pronounce, can be used as essentially a megaphone. When a coroner comes into possession with one, they can channel their death god's power through it, increasing their influence and allowing a rite to be performed. But like a megaphone, the channeled power will be echoed to all the other coroners. And that's right, when a Necronomicon is used by a coroner to initiate a rite, every single coroner from anywhere in the world, no matter where they are, can feel it. Not only that, but they can feel who's using it and know where. That's what makes rites so hard to accomplish. You can't do it sneaky-like. You have to be ready to fight it out with the other powers. And mind you, that's like every coroner, so you're fighting an army to make sure your rite goes through. And rites don't just need a Necronomicon. Rites also need to be done in a place of significance. So if the killing wanted to do a rite in France, then it'd probably be done in the middle of one of those still active landmine fields, a remnant of the world wars. Basically, rites need to be done in places with symbolic value tied to a particular power. If a rite fails, it'll go boom. Everyone who attempted it will go dead, no matter where they are. The surrounding area won't fare much better, though the destruction will depend on the power. I can only imagine how horrible a destruction rite would go if it failed. I picture crazy earthquakes and massive tsunamis. Quick recap on everything I've exposited so far, because I've talked a lot. There are death gods that represent the different ways we can die. When we die, we go to a hell based on how we died. The death gods feed on our suffering. It's pretty rough. Things don't get any better in the not dead world. The death gods can revive people to work for them, called coroners. Coroners, aside from killing people to feed their patron, also seek to initiate a rite that'll supercharge their big daddy. To do that, they need a Necronomicon, and somewhere that means something to their power. The rite itself is difficult to pull off. Expect epic battles when an attempt is made, and a massive boom when it inevitably fails. And that's pretty much Defied. Obviously, I have ideas of characters, plot, and all that jazz. I'm imagining a coroner for the destruction might be this Hawaiian-wearing dude who likes telling dad's jokes. It makes sense symbolically, but I think it'd be really funny. Anyway, this script has been crazy long, so I think I'm gonna save everything else for another day. If you enjoyed this video, nice. That makes me feel really good. I made it to basically rant about whatever nonsense I have in my head, and actually talking it out has really fleshed out this story. While making this mess of a video, I've made changes, come up with awesome ideas, and expanded on the more meh areas. By the way, I promise I don't normally write such edgy stuff, but this one really resonated with me. If you're wondering what I normally write, well, I'm planning to tell you in another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.